What if the truth in cinema was never meant to entertain but to confess? When the lights dimmed in the 1,980 seconds, America told itself that the war was over. But on screen, it kept fighting. The jungles came back disguised as city streets. Soldiers returned home carrying ghosts in their eyes, and every frame of film became a battlefield where guilt, loyalty, and justice bled into each other. These weren't just action movies, they were unfinished confessions, wrapped in gunfire and neon. Somewhere in the smoke, Hollywood's smile cracked, revealing what it had tried to bury, the fear that its heroes were no longer saving the world, they were avenging it. These are the 5 films that revealed what Hollywood tried to hide. By the late 1,980 seconds, the war had become memory, but memory is a weapon that never runs out of ammunition. The United States stood tall, victorious on paper, but the silver screens told a different story, one of disillusionment, isolation, and men who couldn't come home even when they were already there. Action cinema, once a parade of clean heroes and loud victories, began to look haunted. The Cold War blurred the boundaries of morality. Soldiers and vigilantes traded flags for personal missions, and justice became private property. The camera no longer glorified the fight. It observed the aftermath. Every bullet fired seemed to echo a question that no one dared to answer. Who decides when the war ends? Studios called these films entertainment, but what they released were confessions wrapped in adrenaline. Hidden beneath the explosions were quiet truths about guilt, betrayal, and a culture learning to love its violence. Each movie became a mirror America didn't want to look into because the reflection stared back with familiar eyes. Let's rewind to the 5 films that crossed the line between entertainment and confession. Film 1. McBain, 1991. They said the soldiers came home, but McBain never did. Directed by James Glickenhaus, McBain follows Christopher Walken as a Vietnam veteran pulled back into battle when a fallen comrade's sister begs him to help overthrow a South American dictator. On the surface, it's another late 80 seconds mercenary fantasy. Cigar smoke, helicopters, endless ammunition, and men shaped by war who refuse to stop fighting. But beneath that surface, McBain feels less like a mission and more like a relapse. The jungles of Colombia echo the jungles of Vietnam. The cause may have changed, but the addiction to violence remains the same. Walken's McBain isn't chasing victory, he's chasing a feeling. Each explosion becomes a form of remembrance, a way to rewrite the chaos that history refuses to justify. The film was dismissed by critics as empty spectacle, yet its hollowness is exactly the point. These men are ghosts trying to prove they're still alive. When the system abandons its soldiers, they invent their own wars not to save the world, but to feel the weight of purpose again. Maybe McBain was never about revolution at all. Maybe it was about the kind of peace that only exists when the gun is still warm. Film 2. The Punisher, 1989. Justice died, so he made his own. Before superheroes ruled the box office, there was Dolph Lundgren's The Punisher, a film shot in the sewers of Sydney, far from the glossy world of capes and ideals. Here, Frank Castle lives beneath the city, stripped of family, uniform, and forgiveness. What remains is a man haunted by the echo of a single-act survival. On the surface, The Punisher sells itself as a vigilante thriller, a lone warrior against the mob, cleansing the streets with bullets and vengeance. But beneath that armor lies something closer to grief than glory. Every kill is mechanical, ritualistic, less about justice than about finding meaning in repetition. Lundgren's expression never changes because Frank Castle has already died. What walks through the shadows is an echo, the war carried home under a new name. The studio buried the film, releasing it quietly overseas. It was too dark. They said too empty, too joyless. But in truth, it revealed something Hollywood couldn't bear to admit, that the American hero had become addicted to punishment, not peace. By its end, The Punisher doesn't celebrate violence, it mourns it. A film that looks like retribution, but feels like confession. Film 3. Extreme Prejudice, 1987. Law, loyalty, and death all in the same uniform. Walter Hill's Extreme Prejudice opens like a Western and ends like a warning. Nick Nolte plays Texas Ranger Jack Benteen, a man trapped between his own code and the quiet corruption that has redefined it. His best friend, played by Powers Booth, runs a drug empire just across the border, a reflection of the same system Jack once swore to defend. Between them operates a secret military unit, soldiers officially declared dead, now working as assassins for the government. On its surface, the film is about loyalty and betrayal in the American Southwest. But its true subject is something colder, how authority becomes violence when conscience goes missing. Hill stages every gunfight, like a government memo, clean, precise, and detached. The camera never celebrates the action. It studies it. The title itself is military slang, terminate with extreme prejudice. In Hill's hands, those words become a national mantra. Extreme Prejudice is about the moment when institutions stop protecting people and start protecting themselves. The heroes and villains look the same because they were trained by the same country. By the final frame, you can't tell who won, only who's left. And maybe that was Hill's point. When justice and survival wear the same badge, the truth disappears in the dust. Film 4. Death Before Dishonor. 1987. Honor is just another word for revenge. Fred Dryer stars as Gunnery Sergeant Burns, a man who treats morality like a battlefield, clear lines, clean orders, and absolute loyalty. In Death Before Dishonor, when a U.S. embassy is attacked in the Middle East, Burns and his Marines launch a mission that feels less like duty and more like penance. At face value, it's textbook 1980 seconds patriotism. Soldiers rescuing diplomats, speeches about freedom, American flags catching light in the desert wind. But beneath that sandstorm of pride is an unspoken anxiety, the fear that America's righteousness had expired. The film glorifies honor with such desperation that it begins to sound hollow, like an echo rehearsed too many times. Cinematographer Don Burgess bathes everything in golden light, but it feels artificial, sterile, the kind of brightness that hides something. Burns fights not for justice, but for clarity, a world where good and evil still wear different uniforms. The tragedy is that world no longer exists. By its end, Death Before Dishonor feels like a confession disguised as propaganda, a nation trying to remind itself that it still knows the difference between right and wrong, even as the sand buries the evidence. Maybe the title wasn't a promise, it was a plea. Film 5. American Ninja 3. Blood Hunt. 1989. They called it entertainment, but it was a rehearsal for the next war. By 1989, the American Ninja franchise had become a pop culture echo, a spectacle of masks, muscles, and motion. Blood Hunt, the third entry, pushed it further into the surreal, a biological virus, a secret experiment, and a manufactured hero fighting enemies who no longer stood for any real country. It looks like harmless fun, but its meaning hides in plain sight. The film turns combat into choreography. Every kick and spin feels rehearsed, a dance routine performed for an audience addicted to adrenaline. The plot, a mad scientist creating super soldiers, mirrors the very industry producing it. Hollywood was cloning its own myths, refining violence into something rhythmic, almost hypnotic. The hero no longer fights for ideals. He fights because the camera is still rolling. Shot in South Africa during apartheid, Blood Hunt carries an unintentional shadow. Its silence on the world outside the frame becomes its loudest confession, a movie about control, filmed in a place defined by it. Beneath the neon and sweat lies the truth. By turning warfare into entertainment, the culture was teaching itself not to feel. By the end, victory feels rehearsed, the blood too bright to be real. The audience leaves satisfied, and that's the most dangerous illusion of all. Bonus fact: some films die in theaters, others are buried alive before the lights even dim. One of them was Hidden Agenda, 1990, directed by Ken Loach, a political thriller that dared to expose the invisible war behind every official truth. Set in Northern Ireland, it follows an American human rights lawyer uncovering a covert British assassination, only to realize the crime wasn't a mistake, it was procedure. Loach doesn't stage action, he stages absence. Every unanswered phone call, every redacted file, every silence between characters feels heavier than gunfire. In a decade obsessed with vengeance and victory, Hidden Agenda offered neither. It revealed how the machinery of democracy could operate like a weapon, efficient, deniable, and perfectly polite. The film premiered to controversy, labeled unpatriotic, and quietly exiled from wide American release. It didn't explode on screen. It evaporated in distribution. but in that disappearance lies its power. Hidden Agenda exposes what all 5 films in this list were circling around. The war never truly ended because it became internal, fought in boardrooms, headlines, and hearts. While McBain and The Punisher wrestled with ghosts in motion, Hidden Agenda stared at the system that created them. Some films fail on screen, others were never even allowed to fail. 5 films, 5 mirrors, each one reflecting the same wound in a different light. They were sold as action, marketed as adrenaline, but what they carried was confession. Beneath every explosion and every trigger pulled lay a question too heavy for dialogue. What happens to a nation that forgets how to make peace? From McBain's Haunted Soldiers to The Punisher's self-inflicted justice, from Extreme Prejudice's moral collapse to Death Before Dishonor's desperate pride, and finally to American Ninja 3's artificial heroism, the pattern remains. America was not filming wars anymore. It was filming its memory of them. The reel became a battlefield, the projector a weapon. These films remind us that violence in cinema is never just spectacle, it's a language, a confession of what a culture can't say out loud. The light that flickers through the frame doesn't just reveal faces, it reveals the fractures between them. Maybe action was never about heroes saving the world, but about directors trying to save their stories. Which of these 5 films do you think came closest to the truth, the moment where entertainment stopped pretending and finally confessed? Was it McBain's Lost Soldiers, The Punisher's Silent Guilt, or Extreme Prejudice's Law that forgot its soul? Tell me which frame stayed with you after the credits faded, the one that felt too real, too raw, too revealing. And if there's another film that Hollywood buried, a story that vanished before it could speak, leave its name below. We'll find it, rewind it, and bring it back into the light. Real Secrets, where the truth was always in the edit.